In the land of Knaak, at the very northern fringe of the vast oppressive desert which made up much of that land, the small but resolute army of General Augustus Malevolyn remained encamped. They had set up camp some weeks previous for reasons that still mystified most of the soldiers, but no one dared question the decisions of the general. Most of those men had followed Malevolyn since his early days in Westmarch, and their fanaticism to his cause remained without question. But in silence, they wondered why he seemed unwilling to move on. Many felt certain that it had to do with the more gaudy tent pitched not far from the commander's own, the tent belonging to the witch. Each morning, Malevolyn went to her, evidently seeking portents of the future and making his decisions based upon those. In addition, each evening Galeona made her way to the general's tent for more personal matters. How much influence she had over his choices, none could truly say, but it had to be substantial. And as the morning sun began to peek over the horizon, the slim, well-groomed figure of Augustus Malevolyn emerged from his quarters, his pale, clean-shaven features, once described by a now-deceased rival as
the very visage of Lord Death, without the kindness inherent.
Malevolyn stood clad in armor of the darkest ebony, save for the crimson border running along every edge, especially around his neck. In addition, the symbol of a red fox over 3 silver swords decorated the breastplate, the only reminder of the general's far-flung past. The 2 aides attended the general as he put on ebony and crimson gauntlets that looked as if they had just been forged. In fact, Malevolyn's entire suit looked to be in perfect condition, the result of nightly cleanings by soldiers trained to understand what even a single hint of rust might mean to their lives. Fully covered, save for his head, Malevolyn marched directly toward the sanctum of his sorceress, his mistress, resembling something of a tent maker's nightmare. The abode of Galeona looked as if it had been put together like a quilt, with patches of more than 24 shades of color sewn together over and over. Only those like the general, who saw beyond the facade, might have noticed that the various colors created specific patterns. Only those cognizant of the inner workings of sorcery would have known the power inherent in those patterns. The commander did not bother to announce himself, yet just as he has reached the closed flap of the witch's tent, a feminine voice, both deep and taunting, bid him enter.
Enter, my general.
Even though sunlight now toyed with the encampment, the interior of Galeona's tent appeared so dark. If not for the single oil lamp dangling from the middle of the ceiling, the general and his aides would not have been able to see more than a foot beyond their noses. Had that been so, they would have missed quite a sight indeed. Pouches and flasks and items unnamed hung everywhere, although once offered a case in which to house her wares. The sorceress had declined, finding some more purpose in hanging each piece by noose in carefully pre-selected locations. General Malevolyn did not question this idiosyncrasy. So long as he received his desired answers, Galeona could have hung dry corpses from the ceiling, and he would have made no comment. She nearly did just that, while many of her prizes remained, thankfully, hidden within containers. Those that dangled free included the dissected forms of several rare creatures and various components of others. In addition, there were a few items that looked to have come from human sources, although full identification would have required too close an inspection. To further add to the uneasiness her sanctum engendered in all save her commander and lover, the single lamp somehow created shadows that did not move in conjunction with normal reasoning. Oftentimes, Malevolyn's men would see the flame flicker in one direction, but a shadow move in another. The shadows in general also made the tent seem much larger inside than its outer dimensions warranted, as if by stepping in, the newcomers had entered a place not entirely set in the mortal plane. And as the centerpiece to this unsettling and distracting chamber, the sorceress Galeona presented the most arresting and yet also disturbing vision of all. As she rose from the multicolored pillows covering the patterned carpet below, a fire stirred within each man. Lush, cascading black hair fell back to reveal a round, enticing countenance marked by full red and inviting lips, a generous but pleasing nose, and deep, so very deep, green eyes matched only by the sharp emerald ones of the general himself. Thick lashes half draped over those eyes as the witch seemed to devour each newcomer in turn simply by looking at him.
My general.
Built voluptuously, Galeona displayed her assets as she did every weapon at her command. Her gown had been purposely cut as low as it could without failing its most basic function, and glittering jewels accented the edges near her chest. When she moved as if the wind gently pushed her along, her thin garments billowing seductively around her. The visible effect of her charms on Malevolyn proved to be little more than a slight touch of his gloved hand on her deep brown cheek, which the sorceress accepted as if he caressed her with the softest fur. She smiled, revealing teeth perfect, save that they had a slight cat-like sharpness to them.
Galeona. My Galeona. You sleep well?
When I actually slept, my general.
Yes, the same myself.
His very slight smile faded abruptly.
Until I had the dream.
Dream?
The momentary intake of breath before she spoke signaled well enough that Galeona took this comment not at all lightly.
Yes.
He moved past her, staring at without actually seeing one of the more macabre pieces of her collection. He toyed with it, moving one of the joints while he spoke.
The warlord of blood. Arisen.
She swept over to him, a dark angel now at his shoulder, her eyes wide with anticipation.
Tell me all, my general. Tell me all.
I saw the armor without the man's struggle from the grave. Then bone filled the armor, with muscle and tendon joining afterward. Then flesh covered the body, but it was not Bartok as his images have shown. A rather mundane face, if anything, but artisans were never known for carving such as those. Perhaps this was the face of the warlord, although he seemed more a frightened soul in my dream.
Is that it?
No, I saw blood then on his face, and after it appeared, he marched off. I saw mountains give way to hills, and hills to sand. And then I saw him sink into that sand. And there, the dream ended.
One of the other officers caught sight of a shadow in one far corner of the tent. It moved, shifting toward the general. Trained by experience not to speak of such things, he swallowed and held his tongue, hoping that the shadow would not, at some point later, turn in his own direction. Galeona draped herself against General Malevolent's breastplate, looking up into his eyes.
Have you ever had this dream before, my general?
If I had, you would have known.
Yes, I would have. You know how important it is to tell me everything.
She separated from him, returning to the pile of plush pillows. A glimmer of sweat covered every revealed portion of her body.
And this, most important of all, for this is no ordinary dream. No, it is not.
Malevolon waved one negligent hand toward the aide who carried the cloth-covered object. The man stepped forward, at the same time ripping away the material in order to reveal what lay beneath. A helmet with a rigid crest glistened in the weak light of the single lamp. Old but intact, it would have covered most of the head and visage of its wearer, leaving but two narrowed gaps for the eyes, a slight passage for the nose, and a wider but still narrow horizontal gash for the mouth. The back of the helmet hung low, protecting the neck there, but leaving the throat itself completely open. Even in the dim illumination, one could clearly discern that the helmet had been colored blood red.
I thought you might find Bartik's helm of some use.
You may be right.
Galeona separated herself from Malevolon, reaching out for the artifact. Her fingers brushed the aide's own, and the man shivered. With the general facing away from her, and the second officer unable to see from his angle, the sorceress took the opportunity to let one hand briefly caress the aide's wrist. She had tasted him once or twice when her appetite had demanded some change of pace, but knew that he would never dare tell his commander of their encounters. Malevolent would be more likely to have him executed rather than his valued witch. She took the helmet and placed it on the ground near where she had originally been sitting. The general dismissed his men, then joined Galeona there, placing himself directly across from her.
Do not fail me, my dear. I am adamant in this.
For the first time, a bit of Galeona's confidence dissipated. Augustus had always been a man of his word, especially when it came to the fates of those who did not live up to his expectations. Hiding her concern, the dark sorceress placed her hands palm down on the top of the helmet. The general removed his gauntlets and did the same. The flame in the lamp flickered, seemed to have shrunk to nearly nothing. The shadows spread, thickened, and yet somehow also seemed more alive, more independent of the frail light. That they had a surreal, unworldly sense to them did not bother General Malevolyn in the slightest. He knew of some of the powers with which Galeona conversed and suspected others. As a military man with imperial ambitions, he saw all as useful tools to his cause.
Like calls to like, blood to blood. Let that which was his call to that which was his. What the shadow of Bartok wore must be linked again.
Malevolent felt his pulse quicken. The world seemed to pull back from him. Galeona's words echoed, became the only focus. At first he saw nothing but an eternal gray. Then, before his eyes, an image coalesced in the grayness, an image somewhat familiar to him. He saw again Bartok's armor, and the fact that someone wore it now, but this time the general grew certain that the man before him could not possibly be the legendary warlord.
Who?
Galeona did not answer him. Her eyes closed, her head bent back in concentration. A shadow moved behind her, one that Malevolent vaguely thought resembled some large insect. Then, as the image before him grew, he threw his attention wholly back into identifying and locating the stranger.
A warrior. A man of many campaigns.
Forget that. Where is he? Is he close?
She twitched from effort. Malevolent did not care, willing to push her to the very limits and beyond if necessary.
Mountains. Cold, chill peaks.
No help there. The world was filled with mountains, especially the north and across the Twin Seas. Even Westmarch had its share.
Blood calls to blood.
He gritted his teeth. Why repeat herself?
Blood calls to blood.
She teetered, nearly losing her grip on the helmet. Her link to the spell all but broke. Malevolent did his best to maintain the vision on his own, even though his own magical skills paled in comparison to Galeona's. Yet, for a moment, he managed to fix better on that face, simple, nothing at all like a leader. In some ways, panic-stricken, not cowardly, but clearly far out of his element. The image began to falter. The general silently swore the armor had been found by some damned foot soldier or deserter who likely had no idea of either its value or its power.
Where is
The vision
he?
faded away with such abruptness that it startled even him. At the same time, the dark witch let out a gasp and fell back onto the many pillows, completely shattering the spell. A tremendous force threw Malevolent's hands from the helmet. A string of harsh epithets burst from the general's mouth.
I should just...
With a moan, Galeona slowly rose to a sitting position. She held her head with one hand as she looked at Malevolent. He, in turn, considered whether or not to have her whipped, to entice him with the fact that the armor had been found, and then to leave him without the knowledge of where it was.
I haven't failed you, my general. After all this time, Bartok's legacy is yours to fulfill.
Fulfill? Bartok commanded demons! He spread his power over much of the world! I bought that from the peddler as a memento! A symbol of the might that I sought to gain! A false artifact, I thought, but well done! The helmet of Bartok. Only when I put it on did I realize the truth! That it was the helmet!
Yes, my general. And you began to have the dreams. The visions of...
Bartok, I've seen his victories, seen his glories, seen his strength. I've lived them all, but only in my dreams.
It was fate that brought the helmet to you. Fate and the spirit of Bartok. Don't you see? He means for you to be his successor. Trust me. There can be no reason, for you're the only one to see these visions without my aid.
After the first two incidents, each during a period in which Malevolyn had worn the helmet, the general had commanded a few of his most trusted officers to try the artifact on for themselves. Even those who had worn it for several hours had admitted to no subsequent dreams of their own. That, to Augustus Malevolyn, had been proof enough that he had been chosen by the spirit of the warlord to take on his glorious mantle. Malevolyn knew all that any mortal man could know of Bartok. He studied every document, researched every legend. While many in the past have shrunken away from the warlord's dark and demonic history, fearing some taint spreading to themselves, the general had discovered each scrap of information. He could match Bartok in strategy and physical strength, but Malevolyn himself wielded only the least bit of magic, barely enough to light a candle. Galeona had provided him with more sorcery, not to mention other pleasures, but to truly be able to emulate the warlord's glory. Malevolyn needed some manner by which to summon and command not one demon, but many. The armor would open up that path for him, of that he had become obsessively certain. Malevolyn's extensive research had indicated that Bartok had imbued the suit with formidable enchantments. The general's own meager powers had already been augmented by the helmet. Surely the complete, ensorcelled suit would give him what he desired. Surely the shade of Bartok wanted that. The visions had to be a sign.
There's only one thing I can tell you, my general. One thing to encourage you in this quest.
He seized her by her arms.
What? What is it?
She grimaced momentarily from the pain of his grip.
He, the fool who wears the armor now. He comes nearer.
To us?
Galeona pulled one arm free, then touched Malevolyn's chin.
Perhaps, if the helmet and the rest are meant to be with one another. But even if not so, the closer he comes, the better I'll be able to specifically locate him.
Malevolyn departed from the tent, gripping Bartok's helmet as if it were the key to his destiny. His mind raced with visions of power and conquest, cities falling and demonic legions rising to his command. The helmet's ancient magic had captivated him, making him believe he was chosen by the warlord's spirit. He whispered to Bartok's shade, promising to fulfill the warlord's legacy and make it his own.
I will do as you once dreamed of doing. Your legacy will be my destiny. And soon.
Galeona watched Malevolyn disappear through the tent flap, shuddering at his growing instability. She had noted his disturbing tendency to speak as if he were Bartok himself, a sign of the helmet's powerful influence. Galeona understood that the helmet, and likely the entire armor set, possessed formidable magic that she had yet to fully comprehend or control. If she could master its power, she would no longer need her increasingly unstable lover. There were always other, more malleable men to manipulate.
If I could control it, I wouldn't need him any longer. A pity, but there are always other males. Other, more malleable males.
The silence in the tent was broken by a scratchy, deep voice, reminiscent of the buzzing of dying flies.
Patience is a virtue. This one should know. 123 years in this mortal plane, in search of the warlord. So long, and now it comes together.
Galeona scanned the shadows, finally spotting a wavering, insect-like figure in a corner.
Be silent. Someone may hear.
What hears when this one chooses? Know that well.
Then quiet your voice for my sanity, Xazax.
The dark-skinned sorceress glared at the shadow but did not approach. Despite their long association, she did not fully trust her constant companion.
So tender, the ears of a human. So soft, they make their bodies.
You do well to not talk of failures.
A low, chittering noise spread throughout the tent, making Galeona steel herself.
This one of the vision you were shared.
You saw it.
This one will hear it from you. Please indulge us.
Very well.
Galeona described the man and the armor in detail. She knew Xazax had seen everything but still insisted on making her recount the visions. She tried to hurry through the description, focusing on the armor and the landscape rather than the man.
This one knows that the armor is true. This one knows that it wanders this mortal plane. The human. What about the human?
Perfectly ordinary. Nothing special about him.
Nothing is ordinary. Describe.
A soldier. Plain of face. A simple fighter. Probably the son of farmers from the looks of him. Nothing extraordinary.
Again the chittering. The shadow withdrew slightly. When Xazax spoke, he sounded extremely disappointed.
Certain this mortal journey's mirror.
So it seems.
The murky form grew still. Xazax clearly had something in mind. Galeona waited, and waited some more. Xazax had no concept of time where others were concerned, only when it came to his own needs and desires. 2 flashes of deep yellow momentarily appeared where the head of the shadow seemed to be. What might have been the outline of an appendage ending in 3 clawed digits shifted momentarily into sight, then quickly vanished again.
Let him come in. This one will decide whether one puppet is better. Let him.
The shadow melted into the darkened corners.
I have learned much from that foul creature. Increased my power in so many ways because of his past guidance. Yet, much more than Augustus, I would prefer disposing of Xazax, being rid of his horrid self. The general can be manipulated to a point, but not so much my secret companion. With Xazax, I play a continual game of cat and mouse, and too often feel like the latter of the 2 creatures. However, one does not simply break a pact with Xazax's kind. If done without precautions, I might find myself minus my limbs and my head, all before he finally let me die.
And that made her consider at last something new.
He who wore Bartuk's armor certainly looked to be a warrior, a fighter, and, as I had also described him, a simple man. In other words, a fool. I know well how to manipulate such. As a man, he would be defenseless against my charms. As a fool, he would never realize that fact.
She would have to see how matters went with both the general and Xazax. If it seemed one or the other still worked to her advantage, Galeona would do what she could to tip the balance that way. Malevolyn, with the armor his to command, could certainly deal with her shadowy partner. However, if Xazax gained the ensorcelled artifacts first, truly he would be the one to follow.
Still, the stranger presents a possibility. Certainly he can be led around by the nose, told what to do. He presents potential, where the other 2 present risk. Yes, I intend to keep an eye on this fool for my own good. He would be far more susceptible to my desires than an ambitious and slightly mad military commander, and certainly far less dangerous than a demon.